This year's 10th anniversary spring fling for Openhouse honors two examples of San Francisco's giving community. Judge Vaughn Walker, known for his landmark decision in the same-sex marriage case that, well, it spelled the end of DOMA and Prop 8. And the other honoree, Pam David, the Executive Director of the Walter Elise Haas Fund. Welcome, Pam.
Thank you so much, David.
And as you said before we started, work with how many San Francisco mayors?
I worked for 3 mayors. I was appointed by Art Agnos in 1990 to the Mayor's Office of Community Development. And while I was not the first lesbian, I was the first open lesbian on a mayor's staff. I worked for Frank Jordan, and then I worked for Willie Brown, who made me Director of Community Development.
Well, you know, let's just stop right there. I've worked with 4 San Francisco mayors, and I don't think of the 3 you picked, you couldn't have worked with 3 any farther across the political spectrum. I mean, do they still speak to you? I don't think the 3 of them still speak with each other, but I mean...
I have great relationships still with all 3. In fact, I'm planning to go to Willie Brown's birthday party next week.
That'll be fun. My invitation got lost in the mail. There you go.
But it's I think, primarily staff, folks who have worked with him over the years. But all 3 interesting, completely different, and grateful for the opportunities I had throughout. But that's really how my connection with Openhouse happened.
Yeah. I mean, back in the late 1980s, the idea of, quote unquote, an open lesbian being appointed to a mayoral staff, even in San Francisco, that was big news. Did you ever think you'd see a time when it was barely the asterisk on someone's bio?
It was hard to believe. Actually, it was kind of shocking that it was big news even in 1990. And I remember Scott Schaefer, who was assistant press secretary at the time.
Now correspondent with KQD.
Of course, and did an article, you know, BAR did an article on it because it was so shocking. I think the sad thing is that there were plenty of lesbians working for the mayors previously, but they didn't feel that they had the ability, for whatever the reason, to be out.
Right. Now, back during those days, that's when you were first introduced to Openhouse. Tell me about that.
So I'd been at the Mayor's Office of Community Development for a number of years, and then I had left, actually, after Willie became mayor, fired my boss. I left for about 18 months and headed up the city's welfare reform efforts, trying to adjust to that 1996 legislation. And then I got a call one Friday, right before the Dyke March, to come back to community development as the director. And I first said no, but I was eventually convinced to say yes, and I went back, and I had not been in that office very long when 2 women came to see me, and that was Marcy Edelman and Jeanette Gurovitz. And you know, it was somewhat unreal for me to be the director of anything. I had been a community activist and organizer most of my life, and much more comfortable demonstrating outside of City Hall
than being inside under the dome.
Than being inside of City Hall. And I had one friend who walked into my office and just started laughing and said, "Who would have thunk it?" But so here come Marcy and Jeanette. They're nervous as all get out. Somebody had told them that they should come talk to me, and they had this idea about building senior housing. And everybody they had talked to had told them they were crazy. And I don't know if they were crazy. I didn't know them then, but their idea wasn't crazy. It wasn't crazy at all. And I did what I could to help them. I always felt my role in government and now in philanthropy is to provide people great information, to facilitate, make connections. And I introduced them to Marcia Rosen, who was then at the Mayor's Office of Housing, and convinced her to give them a planning grant. Also convinced Marcy and Jeanette to not try to become housing developers themselves, but to partner. And that started us on this road, and I've been an advisor unofficially to Openhouse ever since.
You know, we live in a time and in a city specifically where housing has become a crucial need. And it's become a crucial need physically for people who need housing, people who can't afford to live in San Francisco, that maybe even 5 years ago still thought they could afford to live in San Francisco, and in a time when these issues have become very politicized. How does your work with the Walter Elise Haas Fund kind of bring all this together? Or is there a crossover? There's
some crossover. We don't actually fund specifically LGBT stuff at Haas Senior. Our sister foundation, Haas Junior, has played a key role around marriage. We haven't. We fund lesbian, gay, bisexual, transgender work as it intersects with our other work in public education, economic security for the working poor, the arts, and American Jewish life. We were one of the first funders of LGBT Jewish organizations, 10 years ahead of the mainstream Jewish community accepting LGBT Jews. We have funded the LGBT Cultural Center and Frameline and a number of other different organizations. And we funded the Transgender Employment Center at San Francisco LGBT Community Center. So where it intersects. But generally what we've been about is building community.
Do you think San Francisco is still that shining city on the hill that people wrote about during the 80s and 90s, an example for the rest of the country? I mean, or are we being priced out of being a city on the hill for some people?
That's such a great question, David. Frankly, I think the luster is fading, and it's very sad to me. It's not that we haven't been through different waves of gentrification and price escalation, but there is something different about what's happening now. And I think that if we don't, as a city, try to figure it out in some sort of deeper way than we have, we're going to lose a lot of that edge. I mean, I think a lot of us came to San Francisco because there was an openness about it. There was an edginess about it. It was super interesting. It was a mix of people. If we become more homogenous, if we become more one-dimensional particularly in terms of income or what kind of work people do, I think we will be a less interesting city.
Yeah, David Talbot from Salon just wrote a fascinating piece about that. And I couldn't tell after I finished reading it, which I did twice, was whether or not he was optimistic or not. Are you optimistic?
I am generally a very optimistic person. I can't say I am that optimistic, except that I see so many great people and good things happening. Part of what I always fear, and what I learned in government too, and in philanthropy, is that the world moves at a faster pace than most of us are able to respond to. That's why I think it's so important, some of the things, think about Openhouse. That first conversation with Marcy and Jeanette was 1998. It takes a long time for us in community and in local government to get things moving.
Well, in life in general, Murphy's Law is everything that can go wrong, will go wrong, but there's another law that says things always take longer than you expect.
And we're good at eating our young in the LGBT community.
Well, you lead to my last question in our last few moments. Talk to me about just how, crucial is the need for LGBT senior housing. I mean, the stereotype is that we're all double income, no kids, and there is no need. But that's not, Joel Evans, predecessor on the show, was talking about what a crucial need it is for LGBT seniors.
Yeah, it's a crucial need on multiple levels, and I should say it's a need across income. Now, what is true is that a lot of us are not, whatever the acronym is for double income and queer, but we're not. I have a great job now, but I spend a lot of time in my career not getting paid well as a community organizer and general rabble-rouser, which I still try to be to some extent. And for a lot of women, we still make 74 or 75 cents on the dollar compared to men. There's clearly an affordability issue in housing. But just as important is wanting to support those of us who want to age in community.
And in the community like San Francisco,
in the community that we came of age in. Why should we have to leave?
Right.
Why should we have to leave that community when we get old?
Thank you.
Unless we want to.
Thank you. We've been speaking with Pam David, a rabble-rouser still, and one of the honorees at this year's 10th Anniversary Spring Fling, along with Judge Vaughn Walker. I'm David Perry. Thanks for watching 10%. We'll see you at Spring Fling, and we'll see you next week.